The day had begun like any other. The streets of Rome buzzed with their usual rhythm. Merchants calling out their wares, children darting between stalls, soldiers passing with their measured stride. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, sat at his desk with the familiar weight of scrolls and wax tablets spread before him. He had known many days like this, days of decision, of letters to write, of disputes to settle. Yet something about this day would turn. A messenger entered, his face careful, almost too careful. He delivered the words plainly. A trusted official had failed him. Not out of treachery, but by decree of the Senate, Marcus was asked to step aside from an office he himself had once cherished. It was, in essence, a dismissal, a firing, though emperors were not accustomed to such terms. For a brief moment, Marcus felt the pull of human instinct, a tightening in the chest, the spark of indignation. How could this be? Was he not diligent? Was he not faithful to his duty? Had he not borne the burdens of power with patience? And then, as though observing his own thoughts from a distance, he caught himself. So, he thought, today I am reminded that titles and positions are not mine to own. They are given, and they are taken. I should not cling to them as though they were the marrow of my being. He recalled the teachings of philosophy, the countless nights he had written notes to himself, notes that no one else was meant to read. Do not act as if you were destined to live forever. What is given today may be gone tomorrow. If it is outside your control, let it pass as the wind passes. And so he breathed. Deep, steady, deliberate. He reminded himself, I still command my thoughts, my actions, my choices. What is essential remains untouched. The messenger, uncertain of the emperor's silence, shifted uncomfortably. Marcus looked up, offered a small smile, and said, It is well. Let us continue with what lies before us. For to Marcus Aurelius, being fired was not a defeat. It was another chance to practice philosophy in the raw theater of life. That night, the news still echoed faintly in his mind. Stripped of a role, stripped of esteem in some eyes, Marcus walked the quiet corridors of the palace. The oil lamps flickered low, and shadows stretched across the marble floors. It would have been easy to stew in bitterness, to nurse the wound of pride. Yet Marcus had trained for this, not in military drills, but in the exercise of thought. He sat with his journal, stylus in hand, and wrote, When events beyond my choosing arrive, I must meet them as a man, not a child. A child cries when the toy is taken. A man reflects that the toy was never truly his. Today a title is removed, but was I ever more than flesh, spirit, and reason? These remain, therefore I remain. The room was silent but for the scratch of the stylus on wax. He paused, listening to his own breath, and continued. Do not be ruled by what others grant or deny. Do not say, I have lost my place, but rather, I have returned to my true self. The work of philosophy is never dismissed, for it belongs to no office and no crown. The act of writing itself soothed him. Each word reminded him that serenity was not a gift given by the Senate or by fortune, but a discipline cultivated within. When at last he set the tablet aside, Marcus looked toward the window. The night sky stretched vast, indifferent to human honor or disgrace. The stars neither crowned him nor cast him down. They simply were, and he too would simply be. Sleep came slowly, but when it arrived, it was calm. The morning brought no summons, no duties of the dismissed role.
For the first time in years, Marcus's schedule opened like an empty field. At first, the space felt strange, even heavy. Without obligations pressing upon him, his mind itched for something to resist. Yet he reminded himself the emptiness was not a curse, it was a canvas. He rose early, as was his habit, and walked through the gardens. The dew clung to the grass, the air crisp with promise. Slaves and servants bowed as he passed, but he hardly noticed. His thoughts were elsewhere, on the simple act of walking, on the rhythm of his steps, on the truth that this moment was sufficient in itself. A memory stirred of Epictetus, whose teachings Marcus so often recalled. The Stoic had once been a slave, beaten and broken, yet had spoken of freedom as something within reach of any soul. "You may chain my leg," Epictetus had said, "but not even Zeus himself can chain my will." If Epictetus had endured loss with dignity, then surely an emperor could endure the loss of a title. In the quiet of the garden, Marcus whispered to himself, "I am still free, free to act with justice, free to think with clarity, free to love without condition." He lingered by a fountain, watching the water spill endlessly from one tier to another. No matter how much was taken from the top, the fountain never ceased to flow. So too would his life continue.
As the days unfolded, Marcus found himself reflecting on the nature of work itself. A role could be stripped away, but the deeper purpose of living could not. He thought of the farmer, whose crop might fail one season, yet who returned to the soil the next. He thought of the soldier, who might be relieved from duty, yet who still trained his body for readiness. Was their worth diminished when circumstance removed their labor? Surely not. And so he asked himself, what is my true work? Not the titles, not the decrees, not the speeches before the Senate. His true work was the cultivation of a steady mind, the practice of virtue, the offering of service to those around him. Whether emperor or dismissed official, this work remained. He spent his mornings writing, his afternoons speaking gently with his children, his evenings in study. The hum of Rome carried on, shouts in the marketplace, wheels on the stone streets, arguments rising from the baths. But Marcus's heart grew quieter. A dismissal, he realized, could not dismiss him from being a human being, and being human was labor enough. To rise, to think, to act with care. The palace was alive with whispers. Courtiers speculated about the emperor's dismissal from a role, though no one dared say so openly. Yet Marcus himself carried no bitterness into those halls. He reminded himself that gossip was wind, noisy, shifting, and gone as quickly as it came. What mattered was not what they said of him, but how he chose to stand within himself. He walked through the corridors with the same calm step, pausing to greet servants by name, to inquire after the health of a guard's family, to listen briefly to a child who tugged at his robe. Titles might be taken away, but kindness was never beyond reach. That evening he wrote to himself, "If I am scorned, let me not return scorn. If I am lowered, let me not lower myself further by bitterness. Let others concern themselves with honor. My concern is with virtue, and virtue does not depend on the Senate's decree." He reflected on the fickleness of reputation. Today a man is praised, tomorrow he is forgotten. The applause of the crowd is no more lasting than the foam upon the sea. If he placed his happiness there, he would be forever unsettled. No, his anchor must be within, to live with justice, honesty, humility. That was his true crown. As the days stretched into weeks, Marcus began to notice something he had forgotten: space. The hours once consumed by reports, decrees, and arguments with senators now opened like wide skies. At first, the openness had been unnerving, but slowly he began to see it as a gift. He took longer walks. He sat more often with his children, listening to their laughter, answering their endless questions. He read passages from the Stoics, not hurriedly between duties, but with patient attention. One morning, as he watched his son chase a butterfly through the garden, Marcus felt a quiet joy. He realized how easily the weight of duty could crush these small moments, how seldom he had allowed himself to notice them. He whispered inwardly, "This too is life. Not decrees, not Senate debates, not the endless management of affairs, but this, the play of a child, the flight of a butterfly, the sound of a fountain. Why should I mourn what was taken when so much remains?" In losing one role, he had regained time to practice presence. Yet not all was gentle. There were mornings when bitterness rose like a storm within him. He would wake and feel the sting of loss, that he, Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, could be dismissed from a place of trust. But he met those feelings as a philosopher meets any intruder, with inquiry, not surrender. Is this feeling useful? He asked himself. Does anger restore what has been lost? Does resentment sharpen the mind or soften the heart? No. Then why grant it room? Instead, he reminded himself that life is change. No river flows the same way twice. Why should he expect permanence in his affairs when even the stars shifted and the seasons turned? Loss, he realized, was not the enemy. The enemy was clinging. And so when bitterness came, he did not deny it. He acknowledged it, sat with it, and then allowed it to pass as clouds drift across the sky. It was in the midst of this inner work that Marcus began to consider the broader meaning of freedom. Was he less free now that he had been relieved of a role? At first glance, yes, the loss seemed a chain, but upon reflection, he saw that freedom was never found in titles. A man enslaved to anger is less free than a man in chains. A man bound by fear is less free than one bound by rope. True freedom, he wrote, was the mastery of the self, the ability to choose one's response, to remain steady in the face of fortune's turns. He thought again of Epictetus, who had walked as a slave and yet had spoken of freedom more clearly than any senator. No man is free who is not master of himself. By this measure, Marcus was not diminished, but tested. His dismissal was not a prison, but a proving ground. If he could meet loss with calm, if he could act with virtue though stripped of honor, then he was more free than ever.
And so, the dismissal that had once felt like a wound began to appear to him as a lesson. He would not have chosen it, yet life rarely gives us what we choose. It gives us what it will. The philosopher's task is not to complain, but to transform each gift even those wrapped in pain, into fuel for the soul. He saw that this loss had revealed to him his own attachments, his hidden pride, his subtle dependence on praise, and in seeing them, he could begin to let them go. One evening, as the sun set crimson over the rooftops of Rome, Marcus whispered aloud, "Thank you, fate, for this test. Thank you, gods, for stripping away what I thought I needed, so that I might remember what I truly need. I need only this breath, this reason within me, this chance to live in accordance with nature. Nothing else is required." And in that prayer of gratitude, he felt a peace deeper than applause, steadier than titles, freer than any crown. The days turned into weeks, and Marcus found himself confronting the question, what now? Without the role he had lost, the structure of his life shifted. A lesser man might have grown idle or bitter, but Marcus sensed an opening, an invitation to rediscover. He reminded himself, the obstacle becomes the way. The dismissal was not an end, but a door into another kind of labor. He walked more often among the people, listening to their concerns, not as emperor, but as a man among men. He found solace in ordinary exchanges, sharing bread with a soldier, pausing to speak with a widow, watching a craftsman at work. In these moments, stripped of ceremony, he felt closer to the essence of life. One evening, writing by lamplight, he reflected, "Perhaps it is fortune's mercy that I have been reduced, for in being reduced I am returned to simplicity, and simplicity is the ground of philosophy." It was during this season of reduction that Marcus remembered the resilience of those who had come before him. He thought of Socrates, condemned to death, yet meeting his fate with calm reason. He thought of Cato, who chose death over tyranny and did so without trembling. He thought of countless unknown souls who had endured hardship without fame or recognition, their names forgotten, yet their strength no less real. He realized that his own trial, small by comparison, was simply another thread in the vast weave of human endurance. And so he wrote, "If others have borne worse, why should I not bear this? Let me not be arrogant in thinking my suffering special. What is common to humanity can be endured by humanity, and I am a man, no different from the rest." This thought humbled him. It reminded him that he was not a singular victim, but a participant in the universal rhythm of gain and loss, rise and fall. As the months passed, Marcus discovered a surprising fruit of his dismissal: renewal. Freed from the burdens of office, he found his spirit regaining a lightness he had not felt in years. The constant demands, the endless disputes, the ceaseless weight of authority, all had dulled his senses. Now, in their absence, he rediscovered the simple joy of being alive. He noticed the changing colors of the sky at dawn. He savored the taste of figs in late summer. He listened more attentively to music, to the laughter of his children, to the quiet of his own breath. Loss had sharpened his awareness of what remained, and what remained was more than enough. He wrote, "We are fools to mourn the single drop spilled when the cup of life still brims over. Every moment is a gift, and most gifts are ignored until one is taken. Let me live now as if every sight, every sound, every touch were my first and perhaps my last." Still, Marcus did not retreat entirely from the affairs of Rome. Though his role had been diminished, people continued to seek his counsel. and he, true to his nature, did not withhold it. When a young officer came to him, distressed over being passed over for promotion, Marcus spoke gently. "You are troubled because you think advancement is owed to you, but nothing is owed. Did you serve with integrity? Did you do your duty with diligence? If so, you have already been promoted in the only sense that matters, in character. The rest is not yours to demand." To a widow grieving her loss, he said, "Do not ask why the gods took him, but why they gave him at all. To have loved, to have shared years together, that was the gift. Be grateful for the time, not resentful for its limit." In these conversations, Marcus found that his dismissal had not lessened his influence, it had refined it. Stripped of formal power, he spoke more directly to the human heart. One evening, Marcus sat in the garden beneath the stars, reflecting on the strange journey he had taken since his dismissal. He thought back to the first sting of loss, the pride wounded, the bitterness rising. He contrasted that with the calm he now felt, the clarity that had emerged. What had changed? Not the world, not fortune, not the Senate, only his perspective. He smiled faintly and wrote his conclusion. "The power of life lies not in what befalls us, but in how we receive it. To lose an office is nothing. To lose reason, to lose virtue, that is everything. Therefore, let me guard these treasures, for they are mine alone, untouchable by decree or fate." And in that prayer of gratitude, he felt a peace deeper than applause, steadier than titles, freer than any crown. The turning of the year brought new challenges, as years always do. Illness spread in parts of the city. Crops failed in a nearby province. Soldiers muttered over unpaid wages. Though his formal power was lessened, Marcus was still sought for guidance. He no longer commanded with decree, but advised with wisdom. And often his words carried farther than orders ever could. He found himself thinking, perhaps this is the true role of a philosopher in power, to be stripped of the illusion of control, so that what remains is only counsel, only example, and perhaps that is enough. In the quiet of his study, he wrote, "Do not ask to rule, but to serve. Do not cling to offices, but to opportunities for virtue. Whether fate places you in a palace or in chains, the work is the same, to be just, to be patient, to be free in the soul."
Over time, Marcus's dismissal faded from public memory. People gossiped less, and life in Rome continued with its endless bustle. Yet for Marcus, the event remained vivid, not as a wound, but as a milestone. It marked the moment he had been reminded of what philosophy truly meant, not words on a page, but a way of living in the face of loss. He came to see his firing not as a tragedy, but as one of fate's stern lessons, delivered in love, though not in comfort. And so, years later, when another loss befell him, he was ready. For he knew now, in the marrow of his being, that nothing essential could ever be taken. If life had been testing Marcus, it was relentless in its examinations. Soon after his dismissal from office, Rome faced new waves of trial. Plague spread once more, claiming rich and poor alike. The frontiers rumbled with unrest. And within his own household, illness shadowed those he loved. Marcus did not complain. Instead, he regarded each blow as another chance to embody the principles he cherished. When he himself fell sick, weakened and feverish, he whispered, "If my body fails, let my mind remain steady. If my life shortens, let my virtue lengthen."
What is a man but the harmony of flesh and reason? And if one part crumbles, let the other shine more brightly. He survived the illness, thinner, older, but not broken. The years pressed on, and Marcus found himself increasingly reflecting on death, not with fear, but with curiosity. Had he not been stripped of office once already? Had he not learned to let go of what he thought essential? Death, he realized, was simply the final dismissal, the ultimate firing from life itself. And just as he had met the loss of role with calm acceptance, so he would meet death. He wrote, "To leave this life is no different than to leave a hall when the play is finished. Others may stay, but your part is done. Do not demand more lines than are given. Perform yours well, then bow with grace." These words he repeated often to himself, like a lullaby against fear. In the twilight of his reign, Marcus Aurelius was no longer the young man of restless energy. His beard was streaked with gray, his body worn by years of labor. Yet his spirit was steady. Looking back, he did not see his dismissal as a humiliation, but as one of the great teachers of his life. It had reminded him that identity is not office, that dignity is not title, that freedom is not granted by the Senate, nor withheld by fate. It had taught him that even emperors are fired by fortune, stripped of what they thought was theirs, and in that stripping they are offered a choice, to fall into despair or to rise into wisdom. Marcus had chosen wisdom. And so, as the sun set on his years, Marcus Aurelius whispered his final prayer. "Whatever is taken, let me remain true. Whatever is lost, let me not lose myself. For no dismissal can reach the citadel of the soul unless I open its gates." With that, he closed his eyes, not in defeat, but in peace.